am Lara Schwartz. I'm the director of the Project on Civil Discourse at American University, and I want to welcome you to Parenting Way Up Close with our guest, Katherine Lewis. For those of you who want to utilize captioning, if you look at the chat function on your Zoom, you'll see a link to the person who's providing computer-assisted real-time interpreting. And if you share this video later with friends, we will be posting it on our website. It will be closed caption at that time and fully accessible to everyone. So I want to welcome everyone to today's event. I'm really excited about this. This moment is interesting. Most of our series about communication and community in a time of social distancing is about things that we're accustomed to doing close up that we're doing at a distance. So higher education, Pride Month, activism, and next week, building faith. The thing about parenting is that it's something that we ordinarily do, depending on the age of our kids, sort of divided with others, be they childcare, peer groups, sleepovers, school, camp. And now we're doing it entirely up close. And in addition to that, we've got this complete fusion of our public and private lives, as many of us do work from home in the same space where we're parenting or our kids are doing school or their other activities. We're seeing our public-private life distinctions be eroded. And there's more of an eye on our parenting, for good or bad or medium. So I'm really excited to have Katherine Lewis, who's a journalist and author, come and talk to us today about parenting way up close. And I'm going to turn it over to her in a moment. Just so you know, much like with our other programs, the plan is for us to do a conversation with some questions that I'll ask her for about the first half of our time together, and then move into audience questions. You can use the chat function if you'd like to bring a question or a comment in, and then as well, we have our SPA staff moderator who can help bring people up on video if they'd like to ask a question out loud at that time. So in the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to Katherine to talk a little bit about your thoughts on this moment.
Thank you, Lara, and I'm really grateful to be here with you, and thank you to everyone for joining. This can be such a fragmented time, sort of stuck at home with so many possibilities, and I really appreciate your sharing this hour with us to talk about parenting, which has become such a more visibly important subject as more of us are doing it on Zoom calls with our colleagues and our kids and dogs and in-laws and interrupting. So as Lara said, I'm a journalist who spent many years covering Washington policy and business as a national correspondent for Newhouse and Bloomberg News. And for the last 12 years, I've been independent. So the nice thing about being a solo artist is you can really move your career in the direction you want as long as someone will pay you for it. So since I had kids, I started writing more and more about parenting, and spent 5 years following parents around the country, interviewing educators and psychologists to gather material for my book, The Good News About Bad Behavior, which is really about kids' mental and behavioral health and discipline. And that is now becoming such a bigger topic since we are with our kids 24/7, and we need to make all these choices, by ourselves or with a partner if we're co-parenting. So at the risk of being, too sunny or optimistic, I think this is really a high potential moment for our society because our parenting is so visible to our work colleagues, right, through Zoom or through even calls where you hear background noises. And as someone who covered the workplace and work-life balance for 15 years, that's always been such a tension for anyone with caregiving responsibilities, parents, or someone who's caring for another family member. And I hope that we can become more comfortable bringing our whole selves to work, and everyone acknowledging we all have lives outside of work and we need to tend to them. And right now it's just very challenging to draw those boundaries. So I've loved the instances that I've seen of, for example, Ibram Kendi, giving a book talk with his 4-year-old on his lap and on Zoom, and the newscaster whose 10-year-old, interrupted her live shot, and so he was just sitting there with his head on her lap. And the more we have these models of really successful, accomplished, professionals who have all these accolades, who also have parental and caregiving responsibilities, I think it's easier for all of us to acknowledge it. And when we bring that whole self to work and to all of our interactions in a more public sphere, I think it opens the door more for everyone to be able to see themselves as a whole person. So it's sort of the first, that internal work of getting over that discomfort when your child is interrupting, and then being comfortable. And then you may not realize, but you're a model for maybe a colleague who doesn't yet have children, but can see, oh, maybe I can be professional and also a parent. And sometimes those two worlds collide. And this is one way to gracefully acknowledge it. So I'm really excited by those small examples that I've seen and that have happened in my own life. And I think it's causing a lot of us to ask more internal questions of ourselves, like, okay, how do I prepare for this call that I really don't want to be interrupted? And what can I do in advance to work with my family to carve out those times? And that's sort of an introduction of what's on my mind about the topic, and looking forward to hearing other questions and hearing what everyone in this Zoom with us has to say.
Great, thank you. So this is a time when, it's a really wonderful, hopeful message. And at the same time, so many parents, and really everyone, you hear saying, wow, I am doing an enormous number of things very badly right now, And I do think there are some healthy conversations actually that people are having about being, generous with oneself, and certainly around these areas. But when I think about this time, one thing, and I think this is particularly true with our parenting, is there are so many really, really big things that are beyond our control. So we're waiting to hear, will school be open? And maybe you want that, but you're thinking, oh, will it be safe? Will my child's childcare be open? Will their school be open? Will my jurisdiction have the phases of their reopening plan that'll affect my own work? And these are questions entirely beyond our control, and they remind me of the instincts that we have toward our kids, and maybe even more so when we feel out of control, to want to make things happen or make them do stuff, make the world go in a certain way. And I'm curious, with your, ideas about a mindset toward parenting and how to approach that, particularly in this time, this instinct of wanting to kind of control or get our kids to do stuff, what would be your recommendation?
So this is really, in some ways, the central inquiry in my book, The Good News About Bad Behavior. And I just want to take a second before I get into that to acknowledge what you said, and just to underline how important it is to just recognize we have lost a lot of control. Right. And so that is some of the stress that we're feeling, that we may not always notice or know is sort of underlying our daily interactions and our choices. But for example, self-determination theory tells us we need 3 things to thrive. Autonomy, right, is number 1. We've lost a lot of autonomy. We also need a sense of mastery and a sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves. So when we look at how much autonomy, how much control we've lost, it's really natural that we're trying to then control the few remaining things, what we eat, we think we can control what our kids do. And for me, when I became a parent, I had heard about the terrible twos, and I was expecting that stage. I knew there was even this three-nager stage where they get really sassy. It's like a preview of what they're going to be as an adolescent. But by 4 and 5, I was sort of waiting, like, when does it click and they just do what you want? When do they just become little adults? I hadn't had a lot of exposure to small children. I worked with other adults. I covered Congress. I covered the White House. I was used to dealing with people who were pretty rational and respectful for the most part, at least on the surface. And that's why I started reporting this book, because my own children were not behaving the way I thought they should. And the kids at school that I saw interacting with my kids were also much more dysregulated, sort of hopping up out of their seats or having trouble keeping their hands to themselves. And that's why I spent these 5 years gathering data on kids' behavior and came to the conclusion that this generation of kids, to begin with, oops, I seem to have been muted, but I think I'm good now. Can you hear me? Okay, so even before the pandemic, we had really high rates of dysregulation. So high anxiety, depression, self-harm, substance addiction, all of these behavioral issues actually were affecting 1 in 2 kids, according to the National Institutes of Mental Health, a representative sample of more than 10,000 kids. So to me, when I found this research, it could be very alarming, right? To say, oh my gosh, there's this huge crisis of self-regulation of kids who really struggle to manage their behavior, thoughts, and emotions. And then I choose to look at it as normalizing, right? So if my 5-year-old was refusing to go to bed, for example, that this is a struggle that every other family is having, at least, if not all of them. And then we look, instead of thinking, okay, how do I make my kid do what I want? Because that approach was not working for me. The sort of, rewards and punishment, the bribe and the consequence that I grew up with wasn't working in my home. And I started looking at all these evidence-based models of giving kids self-control, giving them autonomy, which all humans need, even little humans, and finding that that's actually the best way to build their self-regulation. And it's this whole shift in mindset from, how do I make my kids do what I want? Acknowledge we cannot make any other human do anything we want, especially not sleep, eat, so those basic functions that our children really control. And instead think about, okay, how do I build their self-control? So instead of trying to control them, which is a very, very natural impulse, especially right now, we're going to try to look more and more at what are they really struggling with? What skill are they missing that's getting in the way of putting their shoes away when they walk in the house, or getting to bed on time, and really acknowledge that, just like you wouldn't punish your kid if they fell off their bike because they give them a reward for balancing on their bike. A reward or punishment isn't going to improve their balance, right? It's not going to improve their math skills. So why do we think that we can do that with behavior like bedtime or not fighting or all the other things that we like to control in our kids' life? And there's so many ways to think about building those self-control skills, but I divide it into this behavior, thoughts, and emotions. So we're really going to be looking at, how do I help my kids with behavior? That's impulse control. It's frustration tolerance. It's grit, persistence. And instead of looking at our kids give up and say, oh no, oh my gosh, they have no grit, they're going to be living in a van down by the river, right? We're going to say, okay, grit. We're going to work on persistence for right now. And then the thoughts, helping our kids with their negative self-talk, helping them understand their own inner narratives, what's sabotaging them, getting in their ways. And then the third one, emotions, which is really such a huge topic for all of us. Why am I getting stressed? What are the physical feelings in my body that are leading to this emotional reaction? How do I notice those feelings? How do I gauge what helps me in a healthy way to manage those feelings, and what strategies can I use in the future? So I don't just lash out at my sibling, that I go for a walk or do 10 jumping jacks or sit in the cozy corner, catch it sooner. So those are the kinds of strategies I read about in my book, and I think are really more important now than ever, because we are parenting 24/7.
And it's interesting. It's like, well, what does that consist of? Kind of parenting 24/7. or sometimes it feels like 0, 7 if we're, also doing our other things. And so there's this summer of nothing. So we've all got experience now, or many of us have experience now being the absolute worst homeschool principals in the world. So we have that on our resumes. And now there's this summer of nothing. And I think with particularly older kids, I mean, there are kids for whom obviously keeping them occupied is part of their safety, just watching over them. But above that, I have teenagers, you have teenagers. There's this question of how they're going to fill their time. And this is where the clash of, as well, I think, what it is to parent, in the private sense of, this is my prime obligation in life to be good for these people who are growing up, and what it is to parent like on a stage where, your coworkers see, what your kid is up to too. I mean, it's very complex. And so in this summer, there's this instinct to fill it, and some people, that instinct will be, probably informed a little bit by showing, like, my kid did something other than play Minecraft all summer, so that I'm a good person, right? So how do you find out what should be done in this summer of nothing to make it a summer of something in a way that's really for our kids and for us all?
Oh, I love that question, and especially the way we framed it, because I think it is really tempting to look around and see what other people are doing and to feel like, oh, I need to fill those hours, as opposed to, I love the way you framed it, that how can I work with my family to provide what they need? And that is really the question I think we should be thinking about, is not how do we fill the time, but how do we give our kids what they need? First of all, I would say, you need to start with a plan, and you can't sort of just white knuckle through the next 3 months, because I'm sorry to say, I'm guessing it'll be longer than that we are here at home with our kids, so we can't just say, okay, I'll just hold on and kind of hope it goes well. So we want to start with a plan. And that should be a plan in collaboration with our children, with their input as they can give it based on their age, right? So depending on how age appropriate it is for your child, to give them an open-ended question. So a teenager, you might say, like, what do you want to say? Look back at the end of the summer and say, I did this and this, I learned these skills, I contributed in these ways. And let them have much more of a lead in sort of what that looks like and what they're going to be doing. And then with younger kids, we're going to give them more limited choices based on what we need as adults, which very well may be 4 hours of time that we can work, or know that they are occupied with something, or even an hour, right? Whatever is guaranteed, we'll try to find. So we want to make a plan that takes into account our kids' age, our needs for work, for just recuperation time, especially if you have little kids. It may involve bringing in other people. So as your comfort level is, and your health needs allow, asking a friend or family member to spell you, and to set up some of those arrangements. I have one friend who even had a relative who's single move in for the next 3 months, because they can then collaborate and work together. So I think really thinking outside the box in terms of what you need, and not try to get by, because if we wait until we are so stretched thin that we are at the end of our rope, that's when bad things happen with our kids. That's when we snap at them, we lose our temper, we do things that we then regret later. So we want to stay ahead of that edge where we are really just so time starved that we don't have the reserve to be the parents that we want to be. So I love the conversations I've heard parents say that they're having with their kids, and you never know what they're going to want to do until you ask. So playing with, building with cardboard and hot glue guns is like an enormously fun activity for my children, and has been for like the last 7 or 8 years. So I have to teach them, how do you use the hot glue guns safely? How do you use the X-Acto knife? How do we make sure we're not cutting each other or the house? And then they can really be occupied for hours. So I think being creative and thinking with your kids about, planning for the summer and trying to get some things lined up, whether that's online school or crafts, activities, projects they want to work on, some dedicated time when you're going to be free of work and you're going to be able to go outside with them, or you're going to be able to give them that sort of exercise, fresh air that we all need. And then I think it's really important also to plan week by week. So look ahead at the week. You know you have these particular work calls, and that is a time when you 100% need your child occupied. That's when maybe you set up a Zoom call with a family member, and even the littlest kid can be on Zoom with grandma holding a phone and blabbing along. And it may not be a very rewarding experience for the grandparent, but the kid is engaged, they're not in your space, and you know that they're being supervised. So those are just a few of the ideas that I've heard that people have come up with to try to plan ahead to get that space for work, and also know that your kids are safe and healthy, since that, of course, is our number one fundamental responsibility as parents. And the only other thing I'll say with this, I think that we all sort of knew the nuclear family model that we cling to in our society is really broken. There isn't enough childcare that we need. There aren't enough flexible jobs or flexible workplaces to really nourish our families and our children. And again, I hope that this is something that comes out of the pandemic, that we recognize how thin that social safety net is and how much more we need to provide in terms of childcare, in terms of social support, in terms of just making it okay to ask your neighbors and your friends and your family for help, because asking is a huge act of courage. It's also a great way to model for our kids that we seek out resources that we need. And frankly, we shouldn't have to, right? I would love it if America were a country that had universal childcare, or had extended paternity leave and maternity leave the way that many other countries do. And that's, I think, what hopefully will come out of with a renewed appreciation for how important those kinds of programs and the social web is for our growing families.
And yeah, and really valuing those people that do that labor now, who are involved in keeping our kids safe and enriched and loved during the day, and the people who are involved in helping our grandparents with their daily needs, recognizing actually this is really literally essential work. And on the idea of what's essential, so with the little kids, it's exactly, yeah, like if your 4-year-old is talking to grandma while you're talking to your boss, like that's a win. And, because that's a part of parenting that age. And then you look though at, let's say teens, who they're in this time of so much of what their life is about is differentiating from us. It's like winning as a parent is that they're sort of more capable of being differentiated and out in the world, and winning as them is having that opportunity and that privilege. So something very wrong has happened here. And when you think about goal setting for them, the question of like, what's essential? Because there's essential per, if you have this fantasy of your child, being at Stanford or something, in 2 years or whatever, that sort of performative, achievement oriented thing. And then there's a different essential, maybe just what they need to be this summer. And I feel like those are probably very different. What's the real deal? How do we figure out what they need to be doing, whether we should be upset in some way if we just see them on the couch not contributing to the GDP or their resume? Like, how do we do that?
I love that. So in my book, I talk about the 3 things that our kids need and that every human needs, right? We need connection, we need communication in respectful ways that build our sense of our locus of self-control, our self-regulation, and we need a sense of capability, of contribution, of, as you say, contributing to the GDP or society, at least in some productive way. And so, I think that's why I frame many of my conversations with kids as, what are you going to learn? What skills are you going to develop? And how are you going to contribute to this family, to our community, and to the broader world? And it's such a open-ended way to frame it, especially with our teens and young adults. There's lots of things they could come up with. And I think when we give them more leeway, they'll be able to find a path that works for them. And, I think not being on their back every day, but over the course of a week, to say, okay, hey, let's sit down and assess. What was your week like? I mean, and you can even assess on a day like, hey, what was your day like? What felt good? What worked for you? What didn't work? And then that helps them to decide, oh, maybe the 4 hours of TikTok kind of left me feeling a little bit nauseous, and oh, yeah, I forgot to eat and I didn't even move my body, so I was sore and I couldn't sleep very well. So those are the kind of realizations we want to come out of it, right? Rather than them perfectly obeying our instructions to be enrolled in the, build a remote aqueduct in Guatemala by Zoom, right? Or whatever. I don't know what performative things teenagers are doing this summer, because I'm thankfully have removed myself from many of those conversations. And then for our younger kids, I think it's similar. And our younger kids, the great thing about sort of kids up to age 8 is they are such social workers. They will do almost anything if you do it with them. So if, hey, would you help me cook dinner? And yes, it takes 20 to 70% longer with a child right next to you, but they're engaged, they're contributing, you're connecting with them. So that is one of the things I always recommend, is work with your kids, especially when you find kids are resistant to sort of helping with household tasks. And then the age in between, the sort of 9 to 14, when our kids are not quite independent and may not be as cooperative, you want to just, I have in my book a list of household tasks divided by age, and you can just sort of show them a list like, hey, what would you like to learn this weekend? So that this week you can practice it. And if they're practicing doing laundry or cooking a meal or whatever, then you can be working, right? So whatever way helps to engage kids in the household, and then giving them really free rein when it comes to those goals for contribution, for learning. And of course, the other one you mentioned, which is really, really important, which is social interaction, which, as you say, is the job of adolescence, is to differentiate from our parents and to connect with our peers and to learn from our peers who we want to be. The job of adolescence is sort of starting to figure out, who am I? How do I define myself? So we want to let our kids have more of that social interaction, again, in whatever way works for your family and your health needs. So it could be just more FaceTime and chatting with friends on social media. And I really try to talk to my kids about screen time that's connecting versus screen time that's creating versus screen time that's just consuming, like idly browsing through. And then as you're comfortable, socially distanced, interactions. And for me, I think this is a great opportunity to sort of practice the talk about safe sex with our kids, because talking to a friend about, hey, what does social distancing mean to you? How have you been? What, exposures have you had, whether it's going into a grocery store with a mask and gloves, or going into a restaurant, or, what kinds of things have you been doing? And it's a wonderful first step for our kids to take that initiative to protect their own health when they and we start to, plan a get together and ask those kinds of questions. And then also say, okay, so we're going to get together for a socially distanced, chat or bike ride or walk. We'll both be wearing masks. We'll be staying 6 to 10 feet apart. Like, what are the parameters that you're both comfortable with? So I think it's hard. Right? It's hard. It's scary sometimes to trust our teens to hold those lines. But I think we always try to talk in my family about, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So when you have these additional privileges and freedoms, we expect to see the responsibility and accountability, and to really work with kids to make sure those two go hand in hand. So I hope I answered the question. Oh, the other thing that I always like to say in this time is, I think it's helpful for us to do the internal work to decide our bare minimum parenting standards, right? What is it that when you go to sleep at night, you can look back and say, I did my job. My kids are alive, they are healthy and safe, and they maybe, for me, for example, it's they got outdoors, they got fresh air, they got exercise, they ate 3 meals, they connected with every family member, right? We had some of that connection time, and they did something useful, right? It could be useful for the house, it could be useful to their self. And I think we all have a slightly different list. I think sleep is another huge one. So those are some of the ones I would recommend as really essential to our physical and mental health, but you may have slightly different things. And I think it's helpful to think about with yourself first, what do I really need to see my kids doing in a day that makes me feel they're okay, and communicate in whatever way feels comfortable to you with your kids, so that you can, at the end of the day, check those things off. And it doesn't mean there's some days that maybe it doesn't happen, but in as a whole, you're making sure that your bare minimum is met, and it's really what calls to you, not what your mother-in-law thinks they should be doing, or what your neighbor is judging you on, but what you can sleep at night knowing happened that day.
And I really love that question, what would you like to learn? And in my role, teaching undergraduates and on being particularly focused on the transition to the first year of college, that question, what would you like to learn, seems like something that's such a growth activity for a teen, because this is what their future education looks like, where they're really becoming someone who decides, what is it that I want for myself. And there's an extent to which K to 12 education doesn't give them latitude for that, which I actually personally think is somewhat of a shame. So it would be cool if something that came out of this really extraordinary, difficult time was that that we started asking, what would you like to learn more? So it is an extraordinary time, and one of the things is, I think, I had thought before the pandemic that some of the features of what I call, the mommy war, real performative parenting, of judgment, particularly among women, but among parents, about different models and modes of doing things, had maybe settled down. But as, again, our parenting becomes very public and different, becomes right into our workplaces, and the difference between the parent who has, a schedule for everything, and she turns out is the best homeschool principal ever, and the rest of us, and I'll put us in the very much other category. It seems like all of the baggage that comes with parenting, everything from the way that our identity, our race, our social class affects how people, our gender affects how people even judge us as parents, and the fact that it's all front and center, it seems to be right back front and center in a way. And I'm wondering what you're seeing kind of in the public discourse about parenting, that's either hopeful or challenging, or that we can sort of do with this, to
Yeah.
maybe do better.
Yeah, it's such a good question, because there is so much of that. And, you see teenagers out, in clusters, and then immediately, where are their parents? How are their parents allowing this, right? That immediately, when you see kids not doing something right, then it backlashes immediately to how their parents have failed. And I just want to start by saying, I think this is a really natural human impulse to, social comparison is a really powerful drive, that we look around to other people to see what they're doing, and that helps inform our choices. So I think it's natural that we're assessing. This is an unprecedented situation. We don't know what's really safe. The rules are new and sometimes changing every day. So we're always going to be sort of looking to others to say, what are they doing? What should I do? How do I take this new information about the public health situation into my rules for my family? So I always like to say, it's fine to judge, but let's not be judgmental, right? It's fine to use that social comparison, or to assess what other people are doing to inform our decision making. But I would love if we could give each other the benefit of the doubt that each of us is in a different situation. My 70s, mid-70s parents live with me. So I have different health considerations than a friend who doesn't have those at-risk family members in the home. And we really don't know. So I think that this is sort of an opportunity to divide ourselves from one another by being on those judgy text chains about, like, did you see those kids doing X? Or can you believe those parents allow Y? To letting it inform our own choices, and also acknowledge we're all just sort of finding our way in this, right? Because something that seems totally unreasonable one week, in 3 weeks you may have gotten comfortable with, right? So we never know where on that decision-making ladder we ourselves are. And so we also have to give a little compassion to people around us, or people we see on social media, that they may be at a different place, and they may eventually come to the same place as we do, or we may come to the same place that they do. I hope that that is being clear, that, I think there's so much information out there, and we each have to just do the best that we can. And I would love to have less conversation around, oh, can you believe those parents allowed that? And more, oh, I see those parents allowed that. I wonder if that can inform what choices I'm making.
So I guess my last question before our attendees jump in and sort of benefit from your wisdom is, so this is also a time when I think about the necessity list. At least in my house, it feels like the necessity list includes meeting this moment when our country is having an overdue national conversation about particularly anti-Black racism, structural discrimination, violence. And for every age group, obviously, the call to that piece of parenting community members is going to be a little different. But meeting that moment, what guidance, if any, do you feel like parents can use in that part of things?
Yeah, it's one of the great things I love about this moment is because I have teenagers, often they know about stuff that sooner than I do, especially my 16-year-old. So it's been a wonderful, few weeks and hard and challenging and emotional, to be able to have those conversations and get comfortable about where are we just in terms of the health impacts of whatever my kids might want to do in the world, to have those limits. But, I've been talking to my kids about race since they were little, because we're a multiracial family. My mom is Chinese and my dad is white. So it's always been part of who I am. But for me also, it's been a really important time of education and learning, because I think my relation to whiteness and my relation to my own racial identity has shifted, with this conversation. And it's been great to have so many thought-provoking speakers and writers sharing who they are and what they're thinking right now. So I think we can educate ourselves along with our kids, that we can be reading with them, we can be talking with them. There's so many great, amazing resources out there, and people to follow and read. So I think it's a great chance to, especially with our slightly older kids, but even our little kids, 6 and 7 up, know that their parents are fallible. So if they have a question or they see something, we can say, oh my gosh, I have ideas about that, but let's learn together. Right? Let's read this book together. Let's watch this video together. And I do think it's also a good time, especially when the sort of violence was happening and protesters were really seeing a lot of brutality. My 16-year-old saw stuff that was maybe too intense, especially right before bedtime. I remember in particular the video of that little girl who was pepper sprayed, and that was really really hard to see. So especially for your kids who are younger, 10 and under, I think it's a good time to keep in touch with what media they're consuming, so they don't see some of those viral videos the video of George Floyd, I just don't think any child should watch in its entirety, because it's so traumatizing. And really awful. That's my opinion. And of course, I think a parent needs to decide for themselves for what's appropriate. But if we can be paying attention and being in touch with our kids about news and media, especially towards the end of the day, because I think those types of things are harder when they happen later. Our kids, their defenses are down, they're more psychically vulnerable. It may be harder to sleep if they're seeing things. So especially with screens, I think it's healthy right now to have tighter conversation around screens, and to have a bedtime for the screen, so that you're there when your child sees media that may be scary or violent, and you can be there to help them process it. I don't know if I totally went off the rails on that question, Lara, but I think yes, we need to raise kids who make the world a better place. I think all of us want that. So whatever that means to you and your family, we're helping our kids shape their values right now. And I do think this generation is going to be shaped by this summer, and they're going to remember it, and it could be a turning point in their social consciousness. So parenting can be a radical act, and it's again a really high opportunity moment to help our kids figure out who they are and how they want to contribute to the world.
I love that sort of humility that comes in telling your kids, let's learn together. And the truth is, all of us adults actually really need some humility in learning now. And it sounds like our kids actually can be an opportunity for us to seek that. So why don't we, I don't know if anybody's in the chat piping up with questions, but I know our attendees could have some questions and we can move to them.
Yeah, I haven't seen any questions yet, but I think people can ask a question in the chat or ask to be unmuted and then ask a question live. Or I don't know if there's a raise your hand function, but
There's
feel free
not
to
a
chime
hand
in.
raise function here.
And I take all questions, all ages, any subjects, no shame.
Could you talk a little bit about how to have a constructive conversation with your children at, different age children about the upcoming school year that acknowledges what they're likely going to lose out on, and how to make them feel a little bit better moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, okay, there we go. So I think it helps to know your kid. So one way I like to frame this is I am a defensive pessimist, right? I do better when I anticipate the worst, I mentally walk through the worst case scenario and then hope for the best. So that's how I like to move through the world, and that's how I anticipate. My husband is a ridiculous optimist. Everyone is his best friend. This was the best thing ever. So if he anticipates problems or pain in the future, it just brings him down now. So I think it helps to know which category your child is more likely to fall into. I have one kid who will worry and stress and anticipate problems. So we don't talk about it very far in advance unless they bring it up. Right. So I think number one is responding to your kids. If they're bringing up worries, of course, 100% always address it. But if they're not bringing it up, I think, it's fine to have a very light message of, this is what we're planning for the fall. This spring didn't go how we expected, so it's possible the fall may not go as expected, and we're resilient and we can adapt, and we'll, manage our disappointment if things don't turn out according to plan. And then handle follow-up questions after that, because we really, again, have so little knowledge. We have so little control over what's going to happen that, being too set on, promising them how it's going to be is just going to be a very tricky proposition. And the other thing I would say, which I think is a little bit embedded in that question of making them feel better, right? Which making is, by now, a trigger word for me. We can't make another human being be anything, but we can help them process their feelings, right? And I think actually happiness is kind of overrated. I think a lot of us parents say we just want our kids to be happy. Well, happiness is a very fleeting thing, right? I want my kids to be self-aware. I want them to be able to be joyful when they feel joy. So helping our kids maybe sit in the disappointment of, missed a graduation. Yeah, you did not get to be, my daughter was in 8th grade this year. So it was the spring when she was going to be the queen of the school, and they were going to be in charge of all the special year-end events. And there was a lot of grief and sadness and loss because of that. And just acknowledging it, right? Without needing to move to making them feel better. I think that could be very powerful. And again, an opportunity to say, yeah, when you are just feeling so low and so bummed, what are the 10 ideas that might help you to feel better? Is it going on a bike ride, hugging your dog, singing your favorite song, doing a dance party in the kitchen, reading Harry Potter for the millionth time, which both of my kids are doing right now. So then once they start to have their own lists of self-regulation tools, of cheer up tools, then that's going to be serve them for life. Even just asking the question, I'm feeling bad. How do I feel better in a healthy way? Right? Which I think is a good caveat to add. It's going to be a really important internal conversation for them to have for life. So I thank you for the question. And I do see now there's a couple more in the chat right now. So, if a young teen consistently misleads parents by saying they have done something they haven't, how do you suggest handling? Yeah, so it's developmentally appropriate for our kids to lie, especially at the younger ages. And I think the first most important thing is do not panic. This is not a sign you're raising a future criminal. This is a sign maybe that it's not safe for your child to tell you the truth, that they feel they're going to be punished. And I think that's one reason to move away from a reward punishment model of parenting and instead move to a model that I call in my book the apprenticeship model, which is built around connection, communication, and capability building. So in the moment with that, you know, if you know it's a lie, there's no reason to force them to deny it and get more deeply embedded in that lie. I would just move on knowing that, you know what's the truth and act in according with that. So if your child, for example, is lying about use of a screen, right? And you know that they did. If there's proof, obviously you can say, well, you said you weren't on TikTok and the screen time app on your phone says you were on for 90 minutes today. So I don't believe that the phone turned itself on and scrolled through TikTok. So how do we handle this moving forward? If it's hard, I know it's hard to resist being on TikTok. What can we set up that will keep you respecting the rules of our family and keep your mind safe and you know, move forward. And there's a framework that I learned at the Parent Encouragement Program, which I write about in my book here in Kensington, Maryland, called the 4 R's rule of consequences. You can Google, I did a little animated video for The Atlantic on the 4 R's rule of punishment. And it's a way to set up a framework of consequences that do not feel like punishment to your child so that they actually learn from those punishments. So I hope that's helpful. And I would say the best overall piece of advice I have around lying is try to set up your household rules and routines and structures in a way that your kids aren't easily tempted to lie, so that there is accountability or it's obvious if something was done or not, so that they're not having to say I did it or I didn't do it, that it's sort of you have the systems in place that reveal that truth without them having to then have that little moment of challenge. So I hope that helps with that question, and thank you for sharing it. It's not an easy thing to see in your child, and I do hope you are comforted that it's really very natural. Okay, so question, post-pandemic, will socialization be phased out or are they here to stay? And what are strategies to keep children focused on schooling and increase learning skills? Yes, yeah, it's really, I think, it's really hard to learn online. We have this Zoom fatigue and our kids feel it even more. And I think that this year is going to be something that schools are going to have to reckon with. I have huge respect for teachers. Right now, I think they're possibly the most stressed people in our workforce, aside maybe from frontline healthcare providers, because they're adapting to new technologies for teaching and dealing with uncertainty as well. So this, I would trust the educational system's going to sort out grades, right? So take that off the table as a worry. Number 2 is it's really important for parents to know that executive function is a stronger predictor of success in school and life than IQ. So the sort of things we think of as learning, the online classes, the worksheets, the grades, the tests, those are important learning tools, but even more important is for our kids to learn skills in context and learn executive function skills, which is the set of skills that keep us organized. We keep track of projects, we keep track of belongings, we can put together small pieces to create a bigger project. So many ways that comes into play in our daily life with our kids. Whether it's, you know, our kid wants to put together an online store to sell bracelets. So what are all the pieces in that, and how can they learn to create that project? And it's going to bring so much more to them than, you know, an online class in math potentially. So I think being open to seeing different ways that our kids are learning this summer especially is really, really important, because as Lara said, we should not be the worst homeschool principal ever, right? We should leave that to the teachers and focus on what we can do best at home, which is connecting with our kids and working alongside them in the work of the household or enabling them to develop their skills. And there's lots of things our kids would like to do that are projects that will teach those executive function skills. think about cooking. You learn math when you cook, right? You learn sequence of events, you learn order. When our kids are helping to do the laundry, they're sorting, they're, depending on the age of your child. So the good, well-paying job long-term actually will rely more on your child's ability to manage those projects, to self-regulate, to self-soothe, those social and emotional skills, the soft skills employers talk about as so much more important than hardcore academic skills. And there's just a third question, which, it's hard to deal with kids wanting to go out, with friends. So I think that having a quarantine buddy where you do that conversation I talked about earlier of what have you been doing to stay safe? What have I been doing? Talk on the parent level. Do we feel comfortable with them going out for maybe an outdoor outing in the park? That's not, that's lower risk. You're going to have to come to your own comfort level with that. But I think talking to our kids about safety, how do we all keep ourselves safe, and hearing their demands as possibly the starting point for negotiation is really important, as opposed to trying to just shut it down over and over again, and trying to be open-minded. So thank you so much for the question. And and there's another follow-up on executive function. Yeah, it's such an important skill, and lots of kids struggle with it. So it's just this constant feedback of anticipating what are the organizational challenges or the time management challenges going to be in the day ahead, the child experiencing that day, and then reflecting at the end of the day. So what went well, what went badly? Oh, you forgot your online Zoom practice with the basketball team, which my daughter's doing right now. So what will you do tomorrow or next week to remember that practice? So we're always going to be trying to process with our kids, reflect on what happened, anticipate what's happening next, and plan ahead. And that cycle we just repeat over and over for 18 years. And the more we do it, the better our kids will get at it. The more they take the lead on it, the better they'll get at it. And I'm going to just show you a little visual aid. So my daughter, when she comes home from school, in the before times, would make a list, of all the things, tasks that she had, the time that she thought they were going to happen, would she plan a break, and then cross off when she's done. And this is not a child who's naturally organized. So we came to that solution over lots of trial and error of helping her increasingly take responsibility for managing her time, for planning her time, for deciding the order that she was going to do things in. Taking a break, that's another really important thing that came out of this season of online school for my kids, is they realized I can't go straight from online school to sitting at my desk for homework. I need to go play Frisbee, play catch, go for a run, get some kind of physical exercise, and then I can come back a little refreshed to do homework. So thank you for the question. Really happy that you brought that up, and happy to take other questions. Lara, if you have something, or I can also go back.
I love that you mentioned that thing about the break, because actually, again, with this collaborative goal setting, my own son was very explicit when some opportunities came to me. Someone I know possibly had some online work, and my son was like really gracious about it. He's like, I really need for what I work on this summer not to be sort of more doing book work on a screen, because I actually really need some space from that. And what he has been doing is learning a bunch of sort of useful things, like how to bake and how to fix things and play an instrument, and some other stuff. But this idea of a break and our kids feeling safe to say, what I just went through was really hard and I need a break from it, just really resonates.
And I just want to add to that, I love that our kids are developing that self-awareness. And early on, when I was talking with some of my friends on group chat about what's going to happen this summer, what should our teenagers be doing? One friend said, well, as I recall from my childhood, we watch Prices Right and Tic-Tac-Toe, and then, until noon, and then we go sit on the, driveway on a towel, and I think I spent a lot of useless time in the summers when I was growing up, and I turned out okay. So I think also just being comfortable with a couple of weeks of just nothing is not going to be damaging to our kids' long-term success. And it may be a break that they really need, that's healthy for them to get a little bored and be like, okay, that online school doesn't sound so bad now, Mom.
Yeah, and I think realizing that this summer ahead of us or possible time ahead of us is long, and if our kids, I know a couple of the questions were around how do we plan for the fall. I think the fact that there could be hybrid learning or online learning depending on where we are, um, does militate in favor of really hearing our kids when they say, you know, I don't think that I need to do a college enrichment academic thing online this summer, even though it's a great opportunity because my brain has done a lot of that. And I think those of us who are doing sort of Zoom oriented remote work should, if we think about how tired we are, there are a lot of reasons to believe that it's just as exhausting for our kids. Some of the things you said about executive function, it seems like, you know, for me, executive function has been a little harder in this time too. And I'm wondering if you think that collaboratively planning, like how are we going to be more organized, is a thing that we can do with our kids of any age.
Oh yeah, I love that idea. And asking for help from our kids. You know, my husband always says I'm great with information, not so great with objects. So I am always asking the one of my kids who's really good at organization to say, hey, could you help me find a system to sort through our Tupperware or the junk drawer? And asking our kids for help, as one of those questions in the chat in the comment section said, you know, it's very empowering for our kids to be able to help us, and working on these EF skills can really give them that sense of control. So thank you for that comment, Jennifer. It's really a great opportunity to collaborate with our kids and to acknowledge our own weakness in areas, gives them permission to say, oh yeah, I guess maybe this is how I can work on myself, and maybe this is a way I can contribute to the family. So yeah, I love that question, Lara.
And I think your statement around our kids being aware of our fallibility by, I think you said around 7. So the jig is up, like any illusions that we have that they thought we were more together than whatever, you know, the feral self we are now is off. They know. So that maybe that should be liberating.
Yeah.
You know, we don't have to.
Yeah,
pretend.
my husband just did wrote a great column for Washington Parent Magazine on the, you know, being an imperfect dad and why that's actually a really good thing. You know, we don't want our kids to feel that we are their models of adulthood, right? And somehow we're perfect and they have to become perfect in order to be adults. No, we're all human, we're all fallible. And I do think it's liberating and empowering for us as adults to acknowledge our weak areas. And I think it's also really empowering for our kids.
It sounds like that we have one last question before we go on the
Yes.
chat.
Looks like kids spend too much time on smartphones or do other things besides schooling, like playing video games, demanding more and more expensive iPhones. Yes, so this is a real challenge. If I could do a little plug, the Parenting in Place Masterclass series that I'm a part of is doing a session on screen time tomorrow. So feel free to find that. It's on my Twitter, all my social media. So I think it's important to have rules, right? My kids, when they got their own devices, they paid for half of them. They pay for half of the data going forward. So they are happy to babysit or do chores for neighbors in order to earn money to pay those bills. And I think that's one way to help them to see the value and to take responsibility for the privilege of phones. And it's just to know that it's an ongoing struggle. I think it's helpful to have rules. We have our rules posted on the wall. So we just refer to the rules. I'm not telling you get off your phone. The rule says at 5, screen time ends.
Well, thank you so much for an amazing conversation. PCD will tweet out your event for tomorrow. That sounds fantastic. So grateful for your time, and to everyone, thank you all for joining us. I thought those were really great and useful questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great to connect with everyone, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Big Zoom wave to everyone.